One simple act of kindness leads a young girl into a world of secrets, hidden bravery, and a bond that will change her life forever. When Kayla helps an elderly neighbor fix a broken TV, she uncovers a forgotten hero's story, one filled with hidden evidence, a mysterious past, and shocking betrayals. How far would you go to uncover the truth? Dive into this emotional journey of love, courage, and the power of family that's built not by blood, but by heart. The sun shone brightly over the quiet suburban streets of Willow Creek, casting long shadows as it dipped lower into the afternoon sky. 11-year-old Kayla Harris, with her pigtails bouncing behind her, pedaled her bike leisurely down the familiar sidewalk. She loved these moments, the gentle breeze tickling her face, the sound of birds chirping, and the comforting hum of life in her tight-knit community. As Kayla rounded the corner onto Sycamore Lane, she noticed something unusual. A frail, elderly woman hunched over an old TV set on her front lawn. The woman, Miss Agnes Beaumont, looked flustered, her gray hair fluttering wildly in the wind. Kayla slowed her bike, her curiosity piqued. Miss Beaumont wasn't the type to leave her house often, and certainly not to struggle with an ancient television outside. Kayla hopped off her bike, resting it gently against the curb. "Miss Beaumont?" she called out with a cautious smile, not wanting to startle her. Miss Beaumont's head snapped up, her eyes widening slightly in surprise, before softening into a grateful smile. "Oh, Kayla dear, it's just you," she said, her voice carrying a mix of relief and frustration. "I'm sorry I didn't hear you come by." Kayla stepped closer, noticing the trembling in Miss Beaumont's hands as she fiddled with the TV knobs. "What's going on, Miss Beaumont?" Kayla asked gently. "Is something wrong with your TV?" A sigh escaped Miss Beaumont's lips, and she nodded, looking defeated. "This old thing. It finally gave up on me, I think," she explained, her voice tinged with sadness. "I was hoping to watch the news. Keeps me company these days, you know." Kayla's heart ached a little at the sight. She had always known Miss Beaumont as the kind, quiet neighbor who would wave from her porch, but rarely ventured out. Recently, Kayla had noticed her spending more time alone, her once vibrant garden now less tended to. Without hesitation, Kayla stepped forward. "Maybe I can take a look at it," she offered, her voice bright with determination. "My dad's an engineer. He taught me a few tricks." Miss Beaumont's eyes sparkled with a glimmer of hope, the corners of her mouth lifting into a soft smile. "Oh, would you, Kayla? That would be wonderful," she said, her voice laced with gratitude. Kayla knelt beside the TV, her fingers deftly checking the wires and connections. She squinted at the back panel, where a tangle of dusty cords greeted her. It looks like there's a loose wire here," she muttered to herself, feeling the familiar thrill of solving a puzzle. Miss Beaumont watched in awe, her eyes wide. "You're quite good at this, aren't you?" she remarked, a touch of admiration in her voice. Kayla grinned, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I like figuring things out," she admitted, carefully reconnecting the wire. "And I like helping out when I can." Suddenly the TV crackled to life, the screen flickering before settling into a clear picture. A faint cheer of the news broadcast filled the air. Miss Beaumont gasped, clapping her hands together like a delighted child. "Oh my goodness, Kayla, you did it!" she exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. Kayla stood up, dusting off her jeans. "It wasn't too hard," she said modestly, but the pride in her voice was unmistakable. Tears welled up in Miss Beaumont's eyes, and she reached out, gently clasping Kayla's hand. "Thank you, dear," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me. This TV, it was a gift from my late husband. I thought I'd lost it forever." Kayla's smile faltered slightly as she saw the raw emotion in Miss Beaumont's eyes. It was more than just a television. It was a piece of her past, a connection to a life she once knew. Kayla felt a lump form in her throat. I'm glad I could help, she said softly, squeezing Miss Beaumont's hand. Miss Beaumont's face brightened suddenly, as if a new idea had just struck her. Oh, I know, she said, her voice lifting with excitement. Why don't you come inside for some cookies? I just baked a fresh batch this morning. It's the least I can do to thank you. Kayla's eyes lit up at the mention of cookies. That sounds great, Miss Beaumont. Thank you, she said eagerly, her young face lighting up with delight. As they walked towards the front door, Miss Beaumont placed a gentle, affectionate hand on Kayla's shoulder. You're a very special young girl, Kayla, she said, her voice soft with sincerity. Your parents must be so proud of you. Kayla beamed at the compliment, feeling a warm glow of happiness spreading through her chest. It felt good. Better than good, actually. It felt wonderful to have made a difference, even if it was just by fixing an old TV. Inside the house, the aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air, enveloping Kayla in a blanket of warmth and comfort. She followed Miss Beaumont into the cozy kitchen, where a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies awaited on the counter. Here you go, dear, Miss Beaumont said, setting the plate in front of Kayla, along with a glass of cold milk. I hope you like them. Kayla took a big bite of a cookie, savoring the gooey chocolate chips. These are amazing, Miss Beaumont, she exclaimed, her voice muffled by the mouthful of cookie. Miss Beaumont chuckled, her eyes twinkling with joy. I'm so glad you like them, she replied. It's been a while since I've had someone to bake for. As they enjoyed their snack, Miss Beaumont began to share stories from her life. She spoke fondly of her late husband, Walter, a firefighter who had served the community for over 30 years. Her voice softened as she recalled his bravery and kindness, her eyes misting over with memories. It's been quiet since he passed, Miss Beaumont admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes the house feels so empty. Kayla reached out, gently patting Miss Beaumont's hand. I'm sorry you've been feeling lonely, she said, her voice filled with genuine empathy. That must be really hard. Miss Beaumont looked at Kayla, her expression tender and grateful. You're a kind soul, Kayla, she said warmly. Your visit today has brightened my whole week. Kayla felt her heart swell with happiness. I'm glad I could make you smile, she said, her own smile widening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow through the kitchen window, Kayla knew it was time to head home. She stood up, reluctantly brushing cookie crumbs from her lap. Thank you for the cookies, Miss Beaumont. They were delicious. You're welcome any time, dear, Miss Beaumont said, standing up as well. And please don't be a stranger. You've brought so much joy into this old house today. Kayla's face broke into a wide grin. I'd love to come visit again, she said earnestly. Really, I would. Miss Beaumont pulled her into a gentle hug, her frail arms surprisingly strong. You're always welcome here, Kayla, she whispered. You've become a little ray of sunshine in my life. Kayla hugged her back, feeling a deep sense of connection and warmth. As she pedaled her bike home, under the pink and orange hues of the sunset, her heart felt lighter than ever. She couldn't wait to tell her parents about her afternoon with Miss Beaumont. But as she turned into her driveway, a small shadow of doubt flickered across her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something left unsaid in Miss Beaumont's eyes. Little did she know, the small act of kindness she had shown today was just the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. Kayla couldn't stop smiling as she pedaled her bike home that evening. The memory of Miss Beaumont's warm hug and the delicious cookies lingered in her mind. It was such a simple thing, fixing a TV, but it had made her feel like she'd done something truly special. Her parents, Marcus and Naomi Harris, were in the kitchen when she arrived, the familiar scent of her mother's homemade spaghetti sauce filling the air. Hey, kiddo, Marcus greeted her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. You look like you just won the lottery. What's got you in such a good mood? Kayla set her bike helmet on the counter and leaned against the table, grinning from ear to ear. I helped Miss Beaumont fix her old TV today, she said proudly, and she invited me in for cookies. Naomi's eyes softened with affection as she dried her hands. Miss Beaumont, that's the lady who lives a few houses down, right? The one who's always sitting on her porch? Kayla nodded. Yeah, that's her. She was so happy I fixed it. She told me stories about her husband, too. He was a firefighter. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise in his voice. Really? I didn't know that about her. She's lived here longer than we have, but she keeps to herself. Naomi nodded in agreement. She's always seemed like a sweet lady, but a little lonely, don't you think? Kayla's smile faded slightly, her eyes reflecting the flicker of sadness she had seen in Miss Beaumont's. Yeah, she admitted softly. She told me she misses her husband a lot. I could tell she felt really lonely. Marcus exchanged a meaningful glance with Naomi, both of them recognizing the maturity and empathy in their daughter's words. You did a good thing today, Kayla, Marcus said, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's important to look out for our neighbors, especially the ones who might need a friend. Kayla nodded, feeling a sense of warmth and pride. I'm going to visit her again tomorrow, she declared. She said I'm welcome any time. Naomi ruffled her daughter's hair with a smile. That sounds like a great idea, sweetheart. I'm sure she'd love the company. The next afternoon, as soon as Kayla finished her homework, she hopped on her bike and rode back to Miss Beaumont's house. The sun was shining brightly, and the neighborhood was quiet, with only a few cars passing by. When she reached Miss Beaumont's front yard, she found the elderly woman kneeling in her garden, her gloved hands gently pruning a rose bush. Kayla dismounted her bike and called out with a cheerful wave. Hi, Miss Beaumont. Miss Beaumont looked up, her face lighting up with a smile that made her look years younger. Kayla, dear, what a lovely surprise, she exclaimed, standing up slowly and brushing dirt off her knees. I wasn't expecting to see you so soon. Kayla leaned her bike against the fence and hurried over. I wanted to check on you and see how the TV's working, she said with a playful grin. Miss Beaumont chuckled, a sound that seemed to come from deep within her chest, full of genuine joy. It's working perfectly thanks to you. I watched the news last night for the first time in weeks. You've saved me from so much boredom, Kayla. Kayla's grin widened. I'm glad. What are you doing now? She asked, glancing at the rose bushes. Oh, just trying to tidy up the garden a bit, Miss Beaumont explained. It's been a while since I had the energy to care for my flowers properly. Kayla knelt beside her, peering at the roses. They're beautiful, she said sincerely. Do you want some help? I don't know much about gardening, but I can follow instructions. Miss Beaumont's smile grew softer, touched by the girl's willingness to help. That would be lovely, dear, she said warmly. Why don't you help me cut back these branches? Just be careful of the thorns. As they worked side by side, Miss Beaumont began to share stories from her past, her voice tinged with nostalgia. She spoke about the early days of her marriage to Walter, how they had saved up for years to buy their first home, and how he would surprise her with flowers every Sunday after his shift at the fire station. Kayla listened intently, her eyes wide with fascination. It was like hearing a story from a different time, a piece of history she had never known. He sounds like he was an amazing person, Kayla said softly. You must miss him a lot. Miss Beaumont paused, her eyes misting over, as she gazed at the rosebush in front of her. Oh, I do, Kayla, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He was my best friend, my everything. It's been so quiet without him. Kayla felt a pang in her heart, a deep ache of empathy. She reached out and gently squeezed Miss Beaumont's hand. "I'm really glad I met you, Miss Beaumont," she said earnestly. "I don't want you to feel lonely anymore." Miss Beaumont's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She squeezed Kayla's hand back, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "You've brought light back into my life, dear," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't remember the last time I felt this happy." They continued working together in companionable silence, the only sounds being the soft snip of garden shears and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the garden. It felt peaceful, almost magical, as if time itself had slowed down to savor the moment. After they finished pruning the roses, Miss Beaumont led Kayla back inside for a glass of lemonade. They sat together at the kitchen table, the room bathed in the warm golden light of the setting sun. Photos of a younger Miss Beaumont and Walter adorned the walls, their smiles frozen in time. Kayla's gaze lingered on a particular photo. A young Walter in his firefighter uniform, grinning widely, with his arm wrapped around Miss Beaumont. "Is that him?" she asked softly, pointing to the picture. Miss Beaumont followed her gaze and nodded, her eyes sparkling with both joy and sorrow. "Yes, that's my Walter," she said, her voice filled with love. "He was always so full of life, always helping others. It's how he would have wanted to be remembered." Kayla looked back at Miss Beaumont, a sudden realization dawning on her. "You know," she said quietly, "I think he'd be really proud of you too. You're still helping people, just like he did." Miss Beaumont's eyes widened slightly, as if the thought had never occurred to her. Then slowly, a tear rolled down her cheek. "Thank you, Kayla," she whispered, reaching out to touch the girl's cheek with a trembling hand. "You've given me a gift today, a gift I didn't even know I needed." Kayla leaned into the touch, feeling the warmth of Miss Beaumont's palm against her skin. "You've given me a gift too," she replied softly. "I feel like I've found a new friend, maybe even a new family." Miss Beaumont pulled her into a tight hug, her frail body shaking with silent sobs of gratitude and relief. "Oh, Kayla," she murmured, "you've brought so much joy into this old heart of mine. I don't feel so alone anymore." Kayla held her tightly, blinking back her own tears. "You're not alone, Miss Beaumont," she whispered. "Not anymore." As Kayla pedaled home that evening, the sky painted in shades of pink and purple, she felt lighter than she ever had before. She had found something special with Miss Beaumont, something deeper than friendship. It felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in both their lives. But neither of them could have guessed how this simple bond would soon be tested, or the unexpected twist that was just around the corner. The next morning was bright and clear, but Kayla felt an unusual chill in the air as she got ready for school. She couldn't stop thinking about Miss Beaumont, the look on her face when she talked about her late husband, the way her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. It was as if, in one afternoon, they had formed a bond that felt timeless, like the connection between a grandmother and her granddaughter. As Kayla hurried down the stairs, she was greeted by the smell of pancakes. Her mother, Naomi, stood at the stove, humming a cheerful tune. Her father, Marcus, was already seated at the table, sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper. "Morning, sweetie," Naomi said, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of Kayla. "You seem deep in thought. Everything okay?" Kayla nodded slowly, picking at her food. "I was just thinking about Miss Beaumont," she admitted. "She's such a nice lady, but I can tell she's really lonely. I'm glad I got to spend time with her yesterday." Marcus folded his newspaper, giving his daughter a thoughtful look. "You know, Kayla, It's rare to find someone your age who cares so much about their neighbors, he said gently. You've got a big heart. Kayla smiled, a small blush creeping up her cheeks. I just feel like she needs a friend, she said quietly. And I want to be that friend. Naomi came over, ruffling Kayla's hair affectionately. We're proud of you, honey, she said warmly. It's important to look out for people who might be alone, especially those who have lost loved ones. Before Kayla could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door, loud, urgent, and completely out of place for this early hour. All three of them froze, exchanging puzzled glances. Marcus set down his coffee and stood up, heading towards the door. Who could that be? He muttered under his breath. Kayla felt a strange knot form in her stomach. There was something off about the knock, something that made her pulse quicken with unease. She pushed back her chair and followed her father to the front door. When Marcus opened the door, the sight that greeted them was enough to make Kayla's heart skip a beat. Standing on the porch was Miss Beaumont, her face pale and stricken with worry. Beside her was a tall police officer, his badge gleaming in the morning sunlight. His expression was serious, almost grim. Miss Beaumont, Naomi said, stepping forward with concern etched across her face. Is everything all right? Miss Beaumont's eyes flicked from Marcus to Naomi, and then to Kayla. She looked as if she was about to speak, but her voice failed her. Instead, she clasped her hands tightly together, as if trying to stop them from shaking. The police officer cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. Good morning, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. I'm Officer Langley. I'm here with Miss Beaumont because, well, there's something we need to discuss with you. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest. She stepped closer to her parents, feeling their protective presence. Is Miss Beaumont okay? She blurted out, her voice tinged with fear. Miss Beaumont forced a small, wavering smile. I'm fine, dear, she said, though her tone betrayed her unease. But something happened after you left yesterday, and I wasn't sure what else to do, but come here. What happened? Marcus asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. He gestured for them to come inside. Please, let's talk about this. You're making us nervous. As they all moved into the living room, Kayla noticed how tightly Miss Beaumont clutched her purse, as if it held something precious or dangerous. They all took seats, but the air was thick with tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe. Officer Langley spoke first, his gaze settling on Kayla. Miss Beaumont found something unusual yesterday, he began, choosing his words carefully. It seems that while you were fixing her TV, you might have unknowingly uncovered a hidden compartment. Kayla's eyes widened. A hidden compartment, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't see anything. Miss Beaumont nodded, taking a deep, shuddering breath. It wasn't your fault, Kayla, she said softly. I didn't know it was there either. But after you left, I decided to clean up the area a bit, and I noticed a small latch at the back of the TV. When I opened it, I found this. With trembling hands, she pulled a small metal box from her purse and set it gently on the coffee table. It was old, covered in dust, and sealed with a tiny lock. Kayla's eyes locked onto it, her heart racing. The box seemed so out of place, so mysterious. What's in it? Naomi asked, her voice barely concealing her shock. Officer Langley leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. We haven't opened it yet, he explained. Miss Beaumont brought it to the police station late last night. Given its condition and where it was hidden, we believe it might contain evidence related to an old case, a case that involved Miss Beaumont's late husband. The room fell into a stunned silence. Kayla's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the stories Miss Beaumont had shared about her husband. But he was a firefighter, Kayla said, frowning in confusion. Why would there be a box like this, hidden in their TV? Miss Beaumont's face crumpled, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I don't know, Kayla," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Walter never told me about this. I thought I knew everything about him, but now I'm not so sure." Marcus exchanged a worried glance with Naomi. "Is there any danger here?" he asked Officer Langley, his protective instincts flaring up. Officer Langley shook his head. "I don't believe so," he said firmly. "But we do need to open this box and see what it contains. It could be the key to solving a case that's been cold for decades." Kayla felt a shiver run down her spine. She hadn't meant to uncover a secret. She just wanted to help fix a TV. But now, it felt like she'd stumbled into something much bigger, something that carried the weight of the past. "Kayla," Miss Beaumont said, reaching for the girl's hand. Her grip was tight, almost desperate. "I'm so sorry to involve you in this, sweetheart. You've been such a blessing to me. And now it feels like I've dragged you into something dark." Kayla squeezed her hand back, her young face full of determination. "It's okay, Miss Beaumont," she said softly. "I want to help. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." Officer Langley nodded approvingly. "That's very brave of you, Kayla," he said. "But we need to be cautious. There's no telling what we might find in this box." Naomi took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the small, dusty box that seemed to hold so many secrets. "Should we open it here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'd prefer to open it at the station," Officer Langley replied. "We have the right tools there, and it's a safer environment. I'd like you all to come with me, if that's all right." Kayla glanced at her parents, then back at Miss Beaumont. She could see the fear in the elderly woman's eyes, but also a flicker of hope. Whatever was inside this box, it was tied to a part of her husband's life that she'd never known, a part he'd kept hidden, even from her. "We'll go," Marcus said firmly, standing up and offering a hand to Miss Beaumont. "We'll go together." As they walked out the door, Kayla couldn't help but look back at the box one more time, a small lump forming in her throat. This wasn't just an old TV anymore. It was a portal to the past, a mystery waiting to be solved. Little did she know, what they were about to uncover would change everything they thought they knew about Walter Beaumont and the quiet, peaceful neighborhood they called home. The ride to the police station felt longer than it actually was. Kayla sat in the back seat of her parents' car, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The small metal box rested on Miss Beaumont's lap, its presence heavy, as if it held the weight of 1,000 untold stories. The elderly woman's eyes were fixed on it, a mix of fear and anticipation etched on her face. Marcus and Naomi exchanged concerned glances in the front seat. "You doing okay back there, Kayla?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but tinged with worry. Kayla nodded slowly, though her heart was racing. "I'm okay, Dad," she managed to say. But the truth was, she felt anything but okay. It was as if she'd stepped into a story far bigger than herself, a mystery she had unknowingly set in motion by fixing a broken TV. They arrived at the Willow Creek Police Station, a modest brick building that looked out of place against the backdrop of the quiet suburban neighborhood. Officer Langley was already waiting for them by the entrance, his expression serious, yet kind. He gave Miss Beaumont a reassuring nod as she stepped out of the car, clutching the box tightly. "Right this way," he said, guiding them inside. The air was cool and filled with the low murmur of police officers working at their desks. Kayla glanced around, feeling the intensity of the place. She'd never been inside a police station before, and it was both intimidating and fascinating. Officer Langley led them to a small private room at the back of the station. A simple table and a few chairs filled the space. He gestured for them to sit, then placed the metal box in the center of the table. "Before we open this," he began, looking directly at Miss Beaumont, "I want you to know that whatever we find in here, you're not alone. We'll handle this together. Miss Beaumont's lips quivered as she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I never imagined there were still secrets left from Walter's life. He was such an honest man. I just don't understand. Kayla reached across the table and took Miss Beaumont's hand. We'll figure it out, she said softly, her young face filled with determination. With a deep breath, Officer Langley took out a small set of tools and carefully pried open the lock on the box. The room fell silent, the tension thick, as everyone leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the box. The lid creaked as it opened, revealing its contents. Inside were several old, faded photographs, a shiny medal with a ribbon, and a sealed envelope. The photos were yellowed with age, but they depicted scenes of firefighters in action. Smoke billowing from buildings, men in uniform working tirelessly to control the flames. One photo caught Kayla's eye immediately. It was of Walter Beaumont, his face smudged with ash, a triumphant grin on his face as he held a young child in his arms. Miss Beaumont's breath hitched in her throat. These photos? I've never seen them before, she said, her voice a mixture of awe and confusion. Walter never talked about any of this. Officer Langley gently picked up the medal, holding it up to the light. It was engraved with the words, "For bravery beyond the call of duty." He turned it over and showed it to Miss Beaumont. This is a Medal of Valor, he explained. It's awarded for acts of heroism, usually in life-threatening situations. Tears streamed down Miss Beaumont's cheeks as she stared at the medal. He never mentioned it, she whispered. He never told me he received such an honor. Kayla's heart ached as she watched Miss Beaumont's reaction. It was as if she were discovering a whole new side of the man she had loved and lost. There's still the letter, Marcus pointed out, his voice barely above a whisper. All eyes turned to the envelope. It was sealed tightly, with the name Agnes Beaumont scrawled across it in elegant, looping handwriting. Miss Beaumont's hand trembled as she reached for it. She held it for a long moment, tracing the letters of her name with her fingers, as if she could feel Walter's presence through the paper. Are you ready? Naomi asked gently. Miss Beaumont nodded, wiping away her tears. With a shaky breath, she tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The room was so quiet, Kayla could hear the rustle of the paper as Miss Beaumont began to read. My dearest Agnes, the letter began, the handwriting neat, but slightly hurried. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. I wish I could have shared this with you while I was alive, but I couldn't bear the thought of burdening you with these memories. You've always been my light, my safe haven, and I wanted to protect you from the darkness of my past. Miss Beaumont's voice broke, and she paused, pressing the letter to her chest, as if it could ease the pain in her heart. Kayla squeezed her hand, feeling tears prick at the corners of her own eyes. Take your time, Officer Langley said softly. We're here with you. Miss Beaumont nodded and continued, her voice steadier now. During my time as a firefighter, I was involved in a secret investigation, the letter went on. It wasn't something I planned to be part of, but I stumbled upon a series of suspicious fires. Fires that didn't seem like accidents. I couldn't look away. I had to help the police uncover the truth, even if it meant putting myself in danger. Kayla's eyes widened, a shiver running down her spine. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Walter Beaumont, a firefighter she had only known through Miss Beaumont's fond stories, had been part of a covert operation. It felt like a twist straight out of a movie. I found evidence, the letter continued, evidence that one of our own, someone within the fire department, was responsible for setting those fires. They were using them as a cover to commit robberies, knowing that everyone would be too distracted by the flames to notice. I hid what I found because I didn't know who to trust, and I didn't want to put you at risk. Miss Beaumont gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. No, "This can't be true," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. He never, he never said a word about any of this." Marcus leaned forward, his expression grim. "This kind of corruption. It's dangerous," he murmured. "Walter was trying to protect you, Agnes." The room was filled with a heavy silence as the gravity of the situation sank in. Kayla's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the story. "But why hide the evidence in the TV?" she asked, looking up at Officer Langley. "Back then, people didn't have many secure places to hide things," Langley explained. "A broken TV in the attic would be the last place anyone would think to look." Naomi's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. "He was trying to keep his family safe," she said softly. "He must have thought that if the wrong people found out, they'd come after him." "And Agnes?" Miss Beaumont let out a sob, clutching the letter tightly. "He did all this and never told me," she cried. "He carried this burden alone." Kayla's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. She couldn't imagine the pain Miss Beaumont was feeling, discovering this side of her husband's life after all these years. But there was one more paragraph left in the letter. "If you're reading this, Agnes, it means I wasn't able to make things right. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. But I hope that one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. And I hope you'll know that every choice I made out of love for you." The room was silent, except for the sound of Miss Beaumont's quiet sobs. She folded the letter back up and placed it in the box, her hands shaking. "He kept this secret to protect me," she whispered, her voice filled with both sorrow and pride. Kayla reached out, placing a hand on Miss Beaumont's shoulder. "He was a hero, Miss Beaumont," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And now, thanks to you, his story can finally be told." Officer Langley nodded, his expression somber. "We can take this evidence and close the case. Walter Beaumont's bravery will be remembered for what it was. A man who risked everything to do the right thing." Miss Beaumont looked at Kayla, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've given me a gift I never expected, Kayla," she said softly. "You've brought me closer to Walter than I've felt in years." Kayla smiled through her tears, squeezing Miss Beaumont's hand. "I just wanted to help," she said quietly. "I didn't know it would lead to this." Miss Beaumont pulled her into a hug, her frail arms surprisingly strong. "You did more than help, my dear," she whispered. "You brought a piece of my husband back to me." As they left the station, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the small town. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the sleepy streets of Willow Creek as they left the police station. Kayla walked slowly beside Miss Beaumont, who clutched the small metal box close to her chest as if it were a precious relic. Her parents, Marcus and Naomi, walked a few steps behind, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and sympathy. Kayla couldn't stop replaying the events of the day in her mind. The letter, the photographs, the hidden medal. It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. She glanced up at Miss Beaumont, who seemed lost in thought, her expression distant as she stared at the fading sunlight. "Are you okay, Miss Beaumont?" Kayla asked gently, her voice barely more than a whisper. Miss Beaumont turned to her with a sad smile. "Oh, Kayla," she murmured, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm not sure. I feel like I've just found him again, and lost him all over." Kayla felt a pang of sorrow deep in her chest. She couldn't imagine the depth of Miss Beaumont's pain, discovering this hidden part of her husband's life so many years after his passing. It was as if she were mourning him all over again, but with the added weight of untold secrets. When they reached Miss Beaumont's house, the sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Kayla hesitated on the porch, not wanting to leave her alone after such an emotional day. "Would you like us to stay a little longer?" Marcus offered, his hand resting on Miss Beaumont's shoulder. "We can make some tea. Sit together for a while." Miss Beaumont's smile was small but grateful. "That would be lovely," she said softly. "I could use the company tonight." Inside, the house was quiet, the air filled with the faint scent of lavender. Naomi busied herself in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, while Marcus settled into an armchair by the fireplace. Kayla took a seat beside Miss Beaumont on the floral-patterned sofa, noticing how the elderly woman's fingers still traced the edge of the letter, as if seeking comfort from the familiar paper. "Do you want to talk about it?" Kayla asked gently. Miss Beaumont sighed, folding the letter carefully and placing it back into the box. "I don't know where to begin, Kayla," she admitted, her voice a mixture of weariness and sorrow. "I spent my whole life believing I knew everything about Walter. I knew he was a good man. But this—" Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back a sob. Kayla scooted closer, wrapping her arms around Miss Beaumont in a comforting hug. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready." Miss Beaumont patted Kayla's hand, blinking back her tears. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. "You've been such a comfort to me through all of this. I don't know what I would have done without you." Just as Naomi brought over a tray of steaming teacups, there was a sudden knock at the door. The sound was sharp, startling them all. Marcus frowned, exchanging a concerned glance with Naomi, before standing up to answer it. When the door swung open, Kayla could see a figure standing on the porch. A tall, older man, with silver hair and a stern expression. He was dressed in a dark overcoat, his eyes shadowed in the fading light. "Mr. Henderson?" Miss Beaumont's voice was filled with shock as she rose to her feet, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you doing here?" Kayla felt the tension in the room spike immediately. Mr. Henderson was a name she recognized from Miss Beaumont's stories, a retired firefighter who had once worked closely with Walter. He had always been described as a serious, no-nonsense man, but the look in his eyes now was almost accusatory. "I heard you went to the police," Mr. Henderson said flatly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes flicked to the metal box on the coffee table, and his expression darkened. "Is it true? Did you open it?" Miss Beaumont's face hardened, a rare flash of defiance in her usually gentle eyes. "Yes, I did," she replied coolly. "And I'm glad I did. I deserve to know the truth about my own husband." Kayla felt her heart race as she watched the exchange. There was something menacing about Mr. Henderson's presence, something that made her instinctively move closer to Miss Beaumont, as if to protect her. Mr. Henderson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Agnes, you don't understand," he said in a low, urgent voice. "Those things in that box, they were never meant to be found. Walter wouldn't have wanted this." Miss Beaumont squared her shoulders, standing taller, despite the tremble in her hands. "No, you don't understand," she shot back, her voice shaking with emotion. "Walter hid these things because he was trying to protect me, protect all of us. But the truth deserves to come out, no matter how painful it is." Kayla's eyes darted between the two adults, her mind spinning. Why was Mr. Henderson so upset about the box? What did he know that he wasn't saying? Marcus stepped forward, his face a mask of calm but firm resolve. "Mr. Henderson, I think you should leave," he said evenly. "You're upsetting Miss Beaumont. If you have something to say, you can do it another time, when she's ready." Mr. Henderson's eyes flashed with anger. He opened his mouth as if to argue, But then he seemed to think better of it. With a curt nod, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Miss Beaumont sank back onto the sofa, her hands shaking as she pressed them to her forehead. "I can't believe he just barged in here like that," she whispered. "He was always so protective of Walter's legacy. But I never thought he'd react like this." Naomi sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around the elderly woman's shoulders. "Maybe he's scared," she suggested gently. "If there was corruption in the fire department, and he knew about it, it could ruin a lot of people's reputations." Miss Beaumont shook her head, her eyes clouded with confusion. "But why protect them? Why cover it up for all these years?" Kayla swallowed hard, her mind racing with possibilities. "Do you think maybe he was involved?" she asked hesitantly. The suggestion hung in the air, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Then, Miss Beaumont's face crumpled, as if the thought physically pained her. "Oh, Kayla," she whispered, "I don't want to believe that. Mr. Henderson was like family to us. He was one of Walter's closest friends." Marcus sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think we need to be careful, Agnes," he said seriously. "If Henderson is trying this hard to bury the past, it's possible he has something to hide." The room fell into a deep silence, the kind that makes every tick of the clock seem deafening. Kayla looked around at the faces of the adults she trusted most, seeing the same uncertainty mirrored in their eyes. Finally, she took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "I think we need to talk to Officer Langley again," she said firmly. "We can't just ignore this. Walter was trying to tell you something, Miss Beaumont. And now, it's up to us to finish what he started." Miss Beaumont looked at Kayla, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pride. "You're right," she said softly, her voice steadying. "You're absolutely right, Kayla." She reached out and took Kayla's hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. "I don't know how I got so lucky to have you by my side," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I thank God every day for bringing you into my life." Kayla squeezed her hand back, feeling a surge of love for the woman who had become like a grandmother to her. "We're in this together," she promised, "and we're going to get to the bottom of it, no matter what." As they sat there, the shadows lengthening in the dimly lit room, Kayla felt a sense of determination wash over her. The mystery surrounding Walter's secret was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. The next morning, Kayla awoke with a sense of purpose. The events of the previous day still lingered in her mind, like fragments of a puzzle she was desperate to put together. The look on Mr. Henderson's face when he saw the contents of the metal box, it was more than just shock. It was fear. And that fear had sparked something in Kayla, a determination she hadn't felt before. There was more to this story, and she needed to uncover the truth, not just for Miss Beaumont, but for Walter's legacy. As she dressed quickly, her thoughts raced. She knew that if they were going to get any answers, they needed to speak to Officer Langley again. He was the only person she trusted who could help them navigate whatever mess Walter had uncovered all those years ago. Kayla hurried downstairs to find her parents, already sitting at the kitchen table, speaking in hushed tones. Naomi looked up as Kayla entered, her face filled with a mix of worry and pride. "Morning, sweetie," she said, offering a small smile. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Kayla admitted, grabbing a piece of toast from the counter. "I keep thinking about what happened yesterday, about Mr. Henderson and how upset he was. There's something he's not telling us." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "You're not wrong, Kayla," he said. "Your mom and I were just talking about it. We think it's time we pay Officer Langley another visit. We need to make sure this is handled the right way. Kayla's heart lifted at her father's words. I agree, she said eagerly. I want to go with you. And I think Miss Beaumont should come too. Naomi reached out, taking Kayla's hand in hers. Are you sure, honey? She asked gently. This is a lot for you to handle. We don't want you getting hurt. Kayla met her mother's gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. Miss Beaumont needs me, she said simply. I can't just sit back and do nothing. Marcus and Naomi exchanged a glance before Marcus sighed and nodded. All right, he agreed. But you stay close to us, okay? We don't know what we're dealing with here. Kayla nodded, her heart thumping with anticipation. I will, she promised. Let's go get Miss Beaumont. The ride to Miss Beaumont's house was quiet, the tension palpable. When they arrived, they found her sitting on her porch, the metal box resting on her lap, as if it were a lifeline. She looked up as they approached, a small, weary smile tugging at her lips. I had a feeling you'd be coming by, she said softly. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it either. Naomi stepped forward, her expression filled with sympathy. Agnes, we're heading back to the police station, she explained. We need to speak to Officer Langley again, see if he's made any progress with the evidence. Miss Beaumont nodded slowly, her grip tightening on the box. Yes, I think that's the right thing to do, she agreed. I need to know what Walter was trying to tell me. Kayla moved to her side, taking her hand. We'll figure it out together, she said reassuringly. You're not alone in this, Miss Beaumont. The elderly woman squeezed Kayla's hand, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Thank you, dear, she whispered. You've been a blessing to me in ways I can't even begin to describe. They made their way to the police station once more, the familiar brick building looming ahead, like a guardian of hidden truths. Officer Langley was waiting for them in the lobby, his face serious as he motioned them into his office. Thank you for coming back, he said, closing the door behind them. I've been looking over the evidence you brought in, and I need to tell you, this is bigger than we thought. Miss Beaumont's face paled, and she sank into a chair, clutching the box tightly against her chest. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. What did you find? Officer Langley sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I took a closer look at the photographs, he explained. They weren't just random shots of fires. They were taken at specific locations, warehouses, old factories. And there's a pattern. Each of these places had been targeted for robberies, and the fires were meant to cover up the thefts. Kayla's eyes widened. So Walter knew about this, she asked. He was trying to stop it? Langley nodded. Yes, and he was working with a small group of people, including Mr. Henderson. But somewhere along the way, things went wrong. It looks like Henderson and a few others might have gotten involved for the wrong reasons. Miss Beaumont let out a soft gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. No, she whispered, shaking her head. Not him. He was Walter's best friend. He wouldn't. Langley's expression softened. I know this is hard to hear, Agnes, he said gently, but we have to consider the possibility. Henderson's reaction yesterday was concerning. It's possible he was part of the cover-up. Kayla felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. So, they just used Walter? She demanded. They made him think he was helping. But really, they were the ones committing the crimes. Langley nodded, his face etched with sorrow. That's what it looks like, he admitted. Walter was an honest man. He must have realized too late what was happening. The evidence he hid in that box. It was his way of trying to make things right. Miss Beaumont's shoulders shook as she sobbed quietly, her whole body trembling with the weight of this new revelation. Kayla wrapped her arms around her, holding her close. "It's not your fault," she whispered fiercely. "None of this is your fault." Marcus stepped forward, his expression hardening with determination. "What do we do now?" he asked Langley. "How do we clear Walter's name and make sure the people who did this pay for what they've done?" Langley took a deep breath. "I need your help," he said quietly. "We need to confront Henderson. He's the key to all of this. If we can get him to admit what happened, we can close this case once and for all." Naomi frowned, her face filled with concern. "Confront him? That sounds dangerous," Langley nodded. "It could be," he admitted. "But I don't think he'll try anything violent. He's an old man now, and the truth is already starting to come out. We just need to push him a little further." Miss Beaumont wiped her eyes, lifting her head with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I need to do this. For Walter." Kayla looked at her parents, then back at Miss Beaumont. She felt a swell of pride for the woman who had become like a grandmother to her. "I'm coming too," she said. "We started this together, and we're going to finish it together." Langley nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're a brave girl, Kayla," he said. "Let's go see Henderson." The ride to Mr. Henderson's house was tense, the air filled with an unspoken anticipation. When they arrived, they found him sitting on his porch, a cigar in hand. He looked up as they approached, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the group. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Come to interrogate an old man, have you?" Langley stepped forward, his face set in a mask of calm resolve. "We just want to talk, Henderson," he said evenly. "You owe Agnes the truth. It's time to come clean." Henderson's expression hardened. "The truth?" he spat, standing up. "You think you know the truth? You don't know a damn thing." Miss Beaumont stepped forward, her voice strong despite the tears that still clung to her lashes. "Walter trusted you," she said quietly. "He thought you were his friend. Why, Henderson? Why did you betray him?" For a moment, something flickered in Henderson's eyes, regret maybe or shame. He looked away, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of the world had finally settled on them. "I didn't want to," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "But I got in too deep. There were people, powerful people. I was scared." Kayla felt a rush of anger and pity swirl inside her. "You let Walter take the fall," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You let him carry that secret alone." Henderson's face crumpled, and for the first time, he looked like a broken man. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Agnes." Miss Beaumont's expression softened, though tears streamed down her cheeks. "It's too late for apologies, Henderson," she said. "But it's not too late to tell the truth." Langley stepped forward, placing a hand on Henderson's shoulder. "We can take it from here," he said gently. "Come with us. It's time to set things right." As they led Henderson away, Miss Beaumont turned to Kayla, pulling her into a tight hug. "We did it," she whispered. Walter Confinal. Kayla hugged her back, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We did it together," she said softly. Just like family, the weeks following Henderson's confession passed in a blur. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, not just from Miss Beaumont's life, but from the entire town of Willow Creek. News of the old firefighter's secret investigation spread quickly, and the community rallied around Miss Beaumont, offering their support and sharing their memories of Walter. He had become a hero once again, not just for his bravery as a firefighter, but for his determination to expose the truth. Kayla found herself at the center of it all, feeling both proud and overwhelmed. Every time she rode her bike down the street, neighbors would wave and call out her name. thanking her for what she had done. She knew, though, that the real hero was Walter Beaumont. He had left behind a legacy of courage, and she had only helped to uncover it. One afternoon, Kayla was sitting on Miss Beaumont's porch, basking in the warm spring sunshine. The flowers in the garden were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a symbol of new beginnings. Miss Beaumont was beside her, sipping lemonade from a tall glass. She looked more at peace than Kayla had ever seen her, as if the weight of years of unspoken sorrow had finally been lifted. "You know, Kayla," Miss Beaumont said, her voice soft and thoughtful, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I keep replaying those moments in my mind. Walter hiding the evidence, Henderson's betrayal. But there's one thing I keep coming back to." Kayla tilted her head, listening intently. "What's that, Miss Beaumont?" Miss Beaumont turned to face her, a small, wistful smile on her lips. "It's you," she said simply. "If you hadn't come into my life when you did, I might never have found the truth. Walter's story would have remained hidden forever." Kayla felt a lump rise in her throat. "I just wanted to help," she murmured, looking down at her hands. "I never thought it would lead to all of this." Miss Beaumont reached over, gently lifting Kayla's chin, so their eyes met. "You did more than help, Kayla," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You brought light back into my life when I needed it most. You've become the family I thought I'd lost." Tears pricked at the corners of Kayla's eyes, but she smiled through them. "You've become family to me too," she whispered. "You're like the grandmother I never had." Miss Beaumont's eyes softened, and she pulled Kayla into a warm hug. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in the comfort of their shared bond. When they finally pulled away, Miss Beaumont's face was streaked with happy tears. "I want to show you something," she said, standing up and motioning for Kayla to follow her inside. Kayla's curiosity piqued as she followed Miss Beaumont into the living room. The metal box still sat on the coffee table, but it was no longer a symbol of secrets and pain. Now, it felt like a link between the past and the present, a bridge that had brought them together. Miss Beaumont opened the box and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "I found this tucked behind the photographs," she explained, handing it to Kayla. "I didn't see it before, but I think Walter meant for you to have it." Kayla's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten note, brief but filled with meaning. "To whoever finds this," it read, "if you're reading this, it means you've uncovered a piece of my story. Know that the truth was never meant to stay hidden. It is only through courage and kindness that we can make the world better. Pass it on. Walter Beaumont." Kayla's breath caught in her throat, and she looked up at Miss Beaumont, her eyes wide. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew someone would find it one day." Miss Beaumont nodded, her expression filled with a quiet pride. "Yes, he did. And I think he knew it would be someone like you, someone with a heart as big as his." Kayla carefully folded the note and placed it back in the box. "I'll never forget this," she promised. "I'll make sure his story lives on." They spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through the photos and letters, sharing stories and memories. It was as if they were piecing together a tapestry of Walter's life, each thread revealing a new detail, a new facet of the man he had been. That evening, the Johnson family invited Miss Beaumont to dinner at their home. It had become a tradition now, Sunday dinners, where they would all gather around the table, laughing and sharing stories. This time, though, it felt even more special. It was a celebration, not just of family, but of the journey they had taken together. As they sat down to eat, Marcus raised his glass, looking around the table with a smile. "To Walter Beaumont," he said, his voice filled with respect. A man who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult, and to the new family we've all found in each other. Everyone clinked their glasses together, the sound ringing out like a joyful bell. Miss Beaumont's eyes were shining as she lifted her glass. To Kayla, she added, her voice breaking slightly. The girl who brought us all together. Kayla blushed, feeling a wave of warmth wash over her. To us, she said simply, her smile wide and genuine. The rest of the night was filled with laughter and stories, the kind that make you feel like you're exactly where you're meant to be. Kayla sat back in her chair, watching her parents' jokes with Miss Beaumont, feeling a deep sense of contentment. It was hard to believe how much had changed in just a few short weeks, but sitting here, surrounded by the people she loved, she knew that everything had happened for a reason. After dinner, Miss Beaumont took Kayla aside. "I have one more gift for you," she said, pressing something small and cool into Kayla's hand. Kayla looked down to see Walter's Medal of Valor, the one she had found in the metal box. "Miss Beaumont," Kayla gasped, her eyes wide. I can't take this. It belongs to you." Miss Beaumont shook her head, smiling gently. "It belongs to both of us now," she said softly. "It's a symbol of Walter's courage. And yours. You've earned it, Kayla." Kayla's eyes filled with tears as she clutched the medal to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'll keep it safe. I promise." Miss Beaumont hugged her tightly, her frail arms surprisingly strong. "I know you will, dear," she said. "I know you will." As Kayla rode her bike home that night, the medal safely tucked in her pocket, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. The moon was full and bright, casting a silver light over the quiet streets of Willow Creek. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Walter Beaumont's story had been told, his legacy honored. But in many ways, it felt like this was just the start of something new, something that Kayla would carry with her for the rest of her life. And as she pedaled through the night, the cool breeze in her hair, she couldn't help but smile, because she knew that wherever life took her next, she would never be alone. She had found her family, and she had found her purpose. A few months had passed since the truth about Walter Beaumont came to light, but the impact of his story still rippled through Willow Creek. The town had embraced Miss Beaumont as a beloved member of the community, rallying around her with a renewed sense of unity. The local fire station, where Walter had once served, decided to honor his legacy by dedicating a memorial in his name, a tribute to his bravery and sacrifice. Kayla was there for the unveiling ceremony, standing proudly beside Miss Beaumont. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the crowd gathered in front of the newly placed plaque. It was a simple but beautiful tribute. In memory of Walter Beaumont, a hero who fought the flames of injustice and left behind a legacy of courage and kindness. Miss Beaumont's hand trembled as she touched the plaque, her eyes welling up with tears. "He would have loved this," she whispered. "He never wanted recognition, but he deserved it." Kayla slipped her hand into Miss Beaumont's, squeezing gently. "He was more than a hero," she said softly. "He was family. And now, everyone will know the truth." The ceremony continued with heartfelt speeches from the town's mayor, the fire chief, and even a few retired firefighters who had known Walter personally. Each person shared their memories, painting a picture of a man who had been strong, selfless, and deeply committed to doing what was right. When it was Kayla's turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked out at the crowd, at her parents, standing together with pride, at Officer Langley, who gave her an encouraging nod, and at Miss Beaumont, who watched her with a smile that was both sad and hopeful. "I didn't know Walter Beaumont the way most of you did," Kayla began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I've come to learn a lot about him through the stories you've shared and the legacy he left behind. He was a man who believed in the power of truth, in the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." She paused, glancing down at the Medal of Valor pinned to her dress, a gift from Miss Beaumont that she wore with honor. Walter's bravery didn't just save lives in the fires he fought. It saved all of us from a lie that had been hidden for far too long. And I think that's the kind of hero we should all strive to be. The crowd erupted into applause, but Kayla's eyes were fixed on Miss Beaumont, who mouthed the words, "Thank you." After the ceremony, the crowd slowly dispersed, but Kayla stayed behind with Miss Beaumont. They sat together on a bench near the memorial, watching as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the town. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Miss Beaumont said, her voice tinged with a mix of sadness and contentment. "He finally got the recognition he deserved." Kayla nodded, leaning her head on Miss Beaumont's shoulder. "And you did too," she said softly. "You were just as brave as he was. You faced the truth, even when it was painful." Miss Beaumont chuckled, a sound that was both light and full of relief. "I had a good teacher," she said, giving Kayla's hand a gentle squeeze. "You taught me what it means to be strong." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the sky turning from gold to deep purple as night fell. The air was filled with the sound of crickets, a peaceful chorus that seemed to echo the calm in their hearts. "Kayla," Miss Beaumont said suddenly, turning to face her, "there's one more thing I want you to have." She reached into her bag and pulled out the small metal box that had started it all. Kayla's eyes widened. "Miss Beaumont, I thought you would keep this." Miss Beaumont shook her head, smiling. "No, my dear, it's time to pass it on. This box doesn't hold secrets anymore. It holds a story that you helped bring to light. I want you to keep it, to remind you of the courage you showed and the difference you made." Kayla took the box with reverence, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers. It felt different now, lighter somehow. It was no longer a symbol of the past's dark secrets, but a testament to the power of truth and the bonds they had forged. "Thank you," Kayla whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll cherish it forever." Miss Beaumont's eyes softened, and she pulled Kayla into a tight embrace. "You've given me something I never thought I'd have again," she said, her voice breaking. "You gave me back my family." Tears welled up in Kayla's eyes as she hugged Miss Beaumont back. "And you've given me a home," she replied. "You're the best grandmother I could have ever wished for." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, till the first stars began to appear in the night sky. As they walked home together side by side, the streets of Willow Creek felt different, brighter, safer, filled with the echoes of the past, but also the promise of the future. Kayla knew that life would continue to throw challenges their way, but she also knew that they would face them together. The metal box felt warm in her hands, a reminder of the journey they had taken, the truth they had uncovered, and the love they had found along the way. It was a new chapter, not just for Miss Beaumont and Kayla, but for the entire community. They had faced the shadows of the past and come out stronger, united by the legacy of a man who believed in kindness and courage above all else. As they approached the front steps of Miss Beaumont's house, she turned to Kayla with a smile. "What do you say we bake a fresh batch of cookies?" she suggested, her eyes twinkling. "I think we've earned a treat tonight." Kayla laughed, feeling a joy that bubbled up from deep inside her. "That sounds perfect." she agreed. Let's do it. Together, they stepped inside, the door closing softly behind them. The house was filled with the comforting scent of lavender, the lights casting a warm glow that made it feel like the safest place in the world. And in that moment, Kayla knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, surrounded by love, with a family she had found in the most unexpected of places. The legacy of Walter Beaumont would live on, not just in the stories they told or the memorial plaque in the park, but in the hearts of everyone he had touched. And for Kayla, that legacy was a promise to carry forward the lessons she had learned and to keep spreading the light of kindness wherever she went. Because that, she realized, was the true gift Walter had left behind, the knowledge that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. Have you ever experienced an unexpected bond with someone who wasn't related to you by blood? How did it change your life?